three gods in the Old Testament made God do something he had never done before. Not send a plague, not a flood, not fire from heaven. These three gods didn't attack Israel from the outside. They infiltrated from within. One turned worship into a business transaction. One gave God a wife he never asked for. Archaeologists found the proof. And one required parents to burn their children alive, while drums drowned out the screams. This is the story of Baal, MOLECH, and Asherah. The three gods that made God abandon his own people. And by the end, you will never look at the story of the Israelites the same way again. When Joshua led Israel across the Jordan around 1400 BC, they stepped into a world that felt unfamiliar and exposed. For 40 years in the wilderness, they had lived on miracles. Manna fell with the morning dew. Water came from rock. Clothes did not wear out. They had never had to read the sky and wonder if rain would fall. They had never pressed seed into soil and waited. But the day after they ate from the land of Canaan, the manna stopped, just like that. For the first time in an entire generation, Israel faced a question that would echo for centuries. What if the rains don't come? Here is what almost no one explains about Canaan's religious system, and it changes everything. The gods of Canaan were not abstract spiritual ideas. They were economic guarantees. Baal offered rain. Asherah offered fertility, children, full wombs. It was a system built on transaction: perform the ritual, secure the outcome, pay the premium, receive the protection. Religion functioned like insurance. The cost was grain, oil, livestock, and sometimes blood. Israel did not walk into naïve superstition. They walked into a fully formed economic theology that had been operating for generations. And the tragic part, they did not outright reject Yahweh. They tried to supplement him. The book of Judges tells us they served Yahweh and the Baals at the same time. They kept the feasts, they maintained the priesthood. They observed the covenant rituals. And then, just to be safe, they kept a few hilltop altars, just in case. To a people who had never farmed, and now depended entirely on rain, that logic felt reasonable. But spiritually, it was catastrophic. What followed was a pattern that repeated again and again: faith, compromise, idolatry, oppression, rescue. And then back to faith. Each cycle went deeper than the last. What began as a small altar on a hilltop did not stay there. It never does. Eventually, it moved inward, slowly, quietly, generationally. Until one day, it stood inside the temple itself. The first god to gain a foothold was the one mentioned more than any other foreign deity in the Hebrew Scriptures. His name simply meant Lord or Master. In ancient Canaan, that title belonged to the storm. Baal, specifically Baal-Hadad, was the rider of the clouds, the wielder of lightning. The one who split the sky open and sent rain that made crops grow and herds survive. In an agricultural society, one failed rainy season meant famine. Baal was not a curiosity, he was survival. Worshipping Baal was the ancient prosperity gospel. Perform the rituals correctly, maintain the shrine, offer the sacrifice, and the rain will come. For centuries this worship lived at the folk level: small shrines, scattered hilltop altars, local priests. It was persistent and condemned by the prophets, but it remained somewhat peripheral. Then, in 874 BC, everything changed. King Ahab married Jezebel, daughter of the king of Sidon. This was not just a political alliance with religious complications. It was a religious revolution carried into Israel through marriage. Jezebel did not quietly practice her beliefs in private. She arrived as a missionary. She brought 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. They were funded by the royal treasury. She built a temple to Baal in Samaria, the capital, and she began executing the prophets of Yahweh. For the first time in Israel's history, Baal worship was not tolerated. It was endorsed, state-funded, state-protected, institutionalized. The playing field didn't tilt, it inverted. Into that moment stepped a man with almost no introduction, no genealogy, no backstory, just a name Elijah and a declaration. There would be no rain except at his word. 3.5 years passed. The drought was not symbolic. It was devastating. Crops failed. Livestock died. Streams dried into cracked earth. And every day without rain was a silent indictment of Baal, the rain god who could not send rain. When Elijah called for the confrontation on Mount Carmel, the terms were simple. 2 altars, 2 sacrifices. The God who answers with fire is the real God, 1 prophet against 450. From morning until evening, Baal's prophets shouted, they danced, they slashed themselves until blood ran down their arms. The sky gave no answer, silence. Then Elijah rebuilt the altar of Yahweh with 12 stones, 1 for each tribe of a fractured nation. He soaked the sacrifice in water until it flooded the trench around it, and he prayed, measured direct 30. 3 words in Hebrew, fire fell. It consumed everything, sacrifice, wood, stones, dust, even the water. The people fell on their faces. The prophets of Baal were seized. And that same evening rain returned. It should have ended there. It didn't. Within 1 generation, Baal worship resurfaced. Altars rebuilt, shrines restored. Archaeology confirms it persisted long after Carmel. No miracle permanently reversed it. Because the real battle was not about fire, it was about trust. Over and over, Israel chose the transaction over the relationship. The insurance policy over the covenant, the visible altar over the invisible God. Baal was loud, public, spectacular. Asherah was different. She did not dominate hilltops. She entered the home. Asherah was the mother goddess of the Canaanite world. Fertility, sexuality, life itself. Where Baal thundered, Asherah comforted. She appeared as wooden poles, stylized trees, small clay figurines. Archaeologists have found thousands of these figurines in Israelite homes, not temples. Homes Jeremiah describes it, plainly. Children gathering wood, fathers lighting fires, mothers kneading dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven. It looked ordinary. It looked domestic. It looked harmless. Children grew up watching it, absorbing it, accepting it before they were old enough to question it, and then passing it on without thinking. This was not rebellion, it was normalization. In 1975, archaeologists uncovered inscriptions at Kuntalet Adrud in the northern Sinai. One phrase stood out, I bless you by Yahweh of Samaria and his Asher, written by Israelites, not replacing Yahweh, completing him. They did not think they were betraying God. They thought they were improving him, softening him, domesticating his jealousy, giving him a consort to oversee fertility and birth. They did not abandon him. They reshaped him. And then came the moment that still feels unthinkable. King Manasseh placed a carved image of Asher inside the Holy of Holies, inside the room where the ark stood, inside the space where heaven met earth. For 55 years, God did not send fire. He did not collapse the temple. The sacrifices continued. The feasts were observed. From the outside, everything looked intact. But something had shifted that no ritual could repair. The presence had been treated like a roommate instead of a sovereign. Before we go further, I need to ask you something. Baal promised prosperity, crops, security, survival. Asher promised comfort, fertility, a God easier to live with. Everyone around you is doing it, your neighbors, your leaders, your king. The system supports it. Would you have said no? Be honest, because what comes next is darker than anything before it, and it happened because not enough people said no soon enough. For 55 years, an idol stood in God's room. And then a young king named Josiah read what God had actually said, and he wept. In 621 BC, the high priest Hilkiah was overseeing repairs to the temple, a building so neglected under decades of idolatrous kings that the book of the law had been lost, buried under rubble and dust. When Hilkiah found it and had it read to the young king, Josiah's reaction was immediate and visceral. He tore his robes, he wept, and he sent messengers straight to inquire of God, because for the first time he grasped the vast distance between what God had required and what Israel had become. To understand Josiah's courage, you have to see the world he was born into. His grandfather, Manasseh, had placed an idol in the Holy of Holies and shed so much innocent blood that Jerusalem ran with it. His father, Ammon, was so corrupt that his own servants assassinated him after only 2 years on the throne. Josiah grew up surrounded by catastrophic spiritual failure. And yet, when he encountered the actual words of God, something broke open inside him, a spark that centuries of corruption could not extinguish. What followed was the most sweeping religious reform in Israel's history. Josiah tore down the Asherah poles from the temple. He demolished the houses of the male cult prostitutes who served inside the temple complex. He defiled Topheth, the site of child sacrifice in the valley of Hinnom, so that it could never be used again. He destroyed high places built by Solomon for foreign gods centuries earlier. From one end of the land to the other, altars were leveled. 2 Kings leaves no doubt before him. There was no king like him, a king who turned to Yahweh with all his heart, soul, and strength, according to the law of Moses. In 609 BC, at the age of 39, Josiah rode to intercept Pharaoh Necho at the valley of Megiddo. An arrow struck him. He died there. His body was brought back to Jerusalem in a chariot. The nation mourned. His son Jehoahaz reigned only 3 months before being deposed by Egypt, and the next king reversed everything. Within just 23 years of Josiah's death, every altar was rebuilt, every high place restored. The greatest revival in Israel's history lasted less than a single generation. And now, with all restraint removed, the third god claimed his payment. Molech, unlike Baal, who demanded rain, or Asher, who wanted cakes and household shrines. Molech's currency was different: flesh, the most innocent flesh available. Leviticus 18:21 leaves no room for doubt. You shall not give any of your children to offer them to Molech, and so profane the name of your God. God prohibits nothing that isn't being done. And the first Israelite king documented performing child sacrifice to Molech was not a foreign king. It was Ahaz, a descendant of David, sitting on the throne of God's covenant line. 2 Chronicles 28:3 records it plainly. He burned his sons in the valley of the son of Hinnom, sacrificing them to a foreign god of fire. The location lay just outside Jerusalem's southern wall. The valley was called Gehinnom, the Valley of Hinnom. Within it was the Toheth, the place of drums. Those drums heard at the start of this story were not music. They were built to drown out the screams of children as they were sacrificed. Imagine the horror. A father walks this path. He once carried his son on his shoulders. He watched him sleep. He heard him laugh. Now he carries him to the valley because the priest has said it is the price. The ultimate transaction, the ultimate premium. The drums begin. The silence that follows is the only honest response. This was not madness. It was logic. The terrible, learned logic of generations trained to see religion as transaction. Told that gods demanded payment, they followed that reasoning to its grotesque conclusion without ever questioning it. Jeremiah records God's reaction in chapter 32-35. He did not command this. It did not enter his mind that they should commit such abomination. He was grieved, incomprehension filling him. God watched this unfold outside the city he had chosen. A practice so alien to his nature, it could not have originated from him. No nation reaches Molech without first passing through Baal. What began with hilltop altars and rain rituals spiraled over centuries to a valley of burning children. After the Babylonian exile, the valley of Hinnom was never restored. Not rebuilt, not reclaimed, not turned to fields. It became a perpetual wasteland of fire and decay, smoke rising endlessly. Jeremiah named it the Valley of Slaughter in Greek, Gehenna. In the New Testament, Jesus references this place 12 times. Mark 9:48 describes it as where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. A place his audience recognized, a place they had walked past, smelled the smoke, known by history and horror, and now used as the ultimate image of final judgment. Baal corrupted a nation's economics, replacing covenant relationship with commercial transaction. Asher corrupted God's identity, domesticating him quietly, generationally, until he was reshaped to human comfort. Molech corrupted humanity itself, taking the logic of transaction to its grotesque end. Once a nation has burned its own children, nothing remains sacred. Nothing is off limits. Ezekiel, writing from Babylon after Jerusalem's fall, watches Yahweh's glory, the luminous presence of God in the temple, slowly move. From the cherubim above the ark to the threshold, then east, pausing, lingering, looking one last time at the city. And then it is gone. No thunder, no earthquake, no declaration, just absence. The most devastating judgment God ever rendered was not plague, not army, not fire. It was his departure. The temple stood for years after, only to be burned by Nebuchadnezzar, a building already vacated. And yet these three entities did not vanish. They adapted, shed names, but kept their structure. Baal lives wherever faith is reduced to transaction. Asher lives wherever God is reshaped to human comfort. Molech lives wherever innocence is sacrificed for security, convenience, or necessity. The names changed, the altars remained. 570 years later, a man stood on that same mountain in Galilee. He rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. Crowds spread cloaks on the road. When he looked at the city from the Mount of Olives, the same vantage where the glory had last rested, he wept, not politely, not diplomatically. He wailed. The glory that had departed returned with human hands, human tears. The God who had walked away walked back. The drums have stopped. The valley is silent. Which of these three gods, Baal, Asher, or Molech, do you believe is the greatest threat to this generation? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this video opened something in you, subscribe. There's more coming you won't want to miss.